So this is another article by Inman. It says what the Spirit Airlines collapse can teach the real estate industry. This one fatal mistake ended an empire, and it's not what the headlines want you to believe. So I'm not going to read this whole article, but I'm going to give you just a basic understanding about what's happening here. So if you really get into this and you enjoy business, I encourage you to go read the Spirit story. Okay, Spirit began with doing a offering for those that needed to fly for cheap just to get to point A to point B in short distances. Think Vegas, Orlando, the big travel areas. That was their model. Yes, they got a bad reputation for, being cheap and you had to pay for everything. But the point is they had a demographic there that could get from point A to point B. And that was their model. They even made jokes about things. They talked about like, if you wanted an nice seat, you're going to have to pay for it, right? They made a joke about everything, right? If you want a sip of water, you got to pay us for that too as well. They made a joke about it. If you rode Spirit, the flight attendants would kind of laugh at themselves. It was actually kind of funny. They made fun of themselves. And I always felt that was kind of fun, right? But what ended up happening is, now the news makes you, the press release made it sound like they fell apart because of that. Fuel costs due to the war. Sure, gas prices are a factor, but that's not really why they fell apart. What they fell apart with is because during this change, during this whole process, they began to change the way they did their business to be like everybody else. So they were doing the opposite of what RE/MAX was doing in some ways. Okay, RE/MAX was actually, Spirit was trying to become like Delta and American and United. They were gradually changing them to marry and match the two. RE/MAX, unfortunately, didn't do a lot of changing. They just kind of kept doing the same thing over and over again. Spirit did the opposite. They actually just became more like every other airline. So they took away their differentiation and became more like the other companies. And so then everybody else on the airline that was flying Spirit said, well, if I'm going to pay just a few dollars short of Delta and United, why don't I just go there? And so that's what began to happen. People began to leave and not use Spirit because they could get a better experience with Delta United for just a little bit more. So that's the biggest problem. See, it says in late 2010, Spirit decided to break its model and it insisted on being more like other airlines. It stopped charging for carry-ons. Water and refreshments were included. It introduced a first-class big front seat, and it stopped poking fun at itself. Right? It's what Spirit was and what everyone expected until it wasn't. The new CEO during that time said the company was going to change its reputation and be more like the other guys. So these are two opposite. When you look at RE/MAX, they didn't do enough to change like the other companies going around or forward thinking enough. Spirit wanted to become like everybody else. So these are two really good case studies that says, I need to be paying attention. I need to make adjustments, but I need to be forward thinking to see what that looks like to be able to make changes that are not like everybody else and what they're doing. Because if you look at what Real did and EXP and all these other companies that grew like crazy, they completely disrupted the industry. So we got to stay informed. Spirit should not become like everybody else. They should have doubled down in the niche that they had. And that's kind of the argument this article is actually making. It's like when you feel pressure to like go out and start doing many, many other things, and because everybody else is doing it and you forget your niche, you actually could fall apart as well. So that's kind of the argument that they make here. It says, so pick a sector, go all in, and own it all the way. And just when you think it's time to get cute, go own it some more. So he's talking about if you niche down or whatever, that's the point. But